Welcome back to an unexpected art lesson. I'm Bri and the one who knows some things about art. Most of what I know has been absorbed through the internet, and I'm a hyper-creative workaholic, to the surprise of no one.
And I, of course, am Watson. I was lured here with the promise of candy. And art!
Unfortunately, I'm all out of candy. I did eat it all. I have no self-control around certain Easter candies.
Completely fair. Thankfully, I have coffee.
And for this batch of episodes, we are going to be talking about Caravaggio. Picture yourself in Rome at the turn of the 17th century. The streets are teeming with pilgrims and nobility, artists and thieves. In this world of extreme contrasts, where opulent palaces stand alongside squalid alleyways, a revolutionary artist is creating paintings so powerful, so raw, that they will change the course of Western art. Michelangelo Maurice de Caravaggio wasn't painting idealized religious scenes with perfect saints and angels. Instead, he dragged sacred stories down to earth, casting street hustlers as apostles and prostitutes as the Virgin Mary. His models had dirt under their fingernails, weathered faces, and wore torn clothing. When his paintings were unveiled, they scandalized the religious establishment even as they mesmerized the public, which I appreciate everything about that. Make it real. I'm like, did some people miss the part where Jesus hung out with prostitutes? Because he regularly hung out with prostitutes and tax collectors and criminals. Moving on. Born in 1571 near Milan, Caravaggio emerged during the Counter-Reformation, when the Catholic Church was desperately trying to reconnect with the ordinary believers. While most artists responded with dramatic but ultimately sanitized religious art, I feel like sanitized religious art's an oxymoron, Caravaggio took a different approach. His paintings hit viewers like a punch to the gut, dramatic, visceral, and impossible to ignore.
So yeah, with Caravaggio, he challenged the norm in many ways. Even through his depiction of the form, he went with more gritty to the, as Brianna stated, sanitized version. But to understand him properly, you gotta understand the world of Caravaggio. Post-Renaissance Italy was experiencing religious turmoil, with the church fighting to maintain relevance in a rapidly changing and evolving society. The Council of Trent, not to be confused with the Five Trents, or the Trent hierarchy, and for the record, those two things aren't real, I just wanted to see how many things I could work in with Trent as a joke. This episode was brought to you by ADHD. Hey look, a squirrel.
Where?
Anyways, the idea is that Trent had concluded emphasizing art should speak directly to the faithful, making religious stories accessible and emotionally impactful. And while this was going on, the scientific revolution was also beginning to transform how people understood reality. New emphasis on observation and empirical evidence was kind of pushing up against the traditional ways of seeing the world.
No, really.
Back in the time where people were understanding the world's not flat, and etc., Caravaggio's unflinching realism was important as it did represent something radical, a new way to depict truth amongst the, let's just go with observed reality and religious perception.
Yeah, and a little bit about the history of Caravaggio. A lot of people joke that art is made through suffering, and most artists have dramatic backstories. I'm not going to totally disagree with that. It's not required, but it is a regular occurrence.
I am artist man!
Orphaned at age 11 during a plague outbreak, young Michelangelo Maurice took his name from the town of Caravaggio in Lombardy. Apprenticed to a painter in Milan, he developed technical skills, but found the mannered style of late mannerism stifling. Sounds very boring, not gonna lie. When he arrived in Rome around 1592, not 1952, we're not quite that modern yet, he was nearly destitute, painting fruit and flowers for quick sales. Which, fair enough. If it's easy enough to do, makes you happy, good way to make some money, not gonna judge. His breakthrough came when Cardinal Francesco del Monte recognized his raw talent and became his patron, because nothing like having a cardinal as a patron. That kind of gives you some clout and money. But even with powerful protection, Caravaggio's personal life was as dramatic as his paintings. Court records show him repeatedly arrested for carrying weapons without permits, brawling in the streets, and eventually fatally wounding a band in a duel. This outsider status was celebrated and notorious, and fused his work with tension and urgency unmatched by his contemporaries. This dude feels very much like he was the artistic embodiment of Fight Me in the 1590s.
Yeah, dude was the original Fight Club.
Just absolutely Fight Me. And while he created multiple masterpieces throughout his very turbulent and interesting career, we've got a couple of works that we would like to talk about that not only showcase his genius, but his direct influence on modern visual storytelling. And Watson, would you like to introduce us to one of those paintings?
Yes, this would actually be one of the first Caravaggios I actually got to see in person. Ironically, I was allowed in Rome. I still feel that somebody made a mistake on that one, but either way, here nor there. This would be The Calling of Saint Matthew. This was created by Caravaggio approximately in the year 1599 to 1600, although there are some artists and historians that would actually argue this was actually a piece that was developed earlier due to certain techniques, but nobody really knows for sure. I just know that's an interesting tidbit about the piece.
Very interesting indeed.
There's a large school of determining historical records, but depending on the evolution of art styles. However, there's always a large amount of kind of if-then to that, just due to...
Yeah, because some art styles might have a resurgence in popularity when a certain artist was introduced to a certain style. I think it could also potentially be used, like, look at what sort of pigments or the style of dress, but it's still... The only way to know for sure is to go back in time and find where he was when he painted this, and then look at the date. But I don't think we're quite to that point scientifically yet.
Yeah.
And may not be for a while, which is probably a good thing. I don't think anyone should be trusted with the ability to travel through time. Even I would cause so much chaos.
I would try to not cause chaos, and then I would just give up after realizing chaos has already been caused.
True. Butterfly effect. Continue with the painting, though, before we can get distracted on a tangent on the drawbacks and bonuses of time travel.
Okie dokie. So, this would be The Calling of St. Matthew. This was located in the church of San Luigi de Franceschi. And again, if San Luigi, if you're listening to this show, one, dude, and two, sorry for the name. And of course, this is in Rome. You would find yourself before a massive canvas stretching nearly 11 feet high. It is arguably Caravaggio's most well-known work. In a dingy Roman tavern, 5 men sit around a table counting money. From the right, Christ enters with Peter, his finger extended like Adam in Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel, which this does play into artists even in post-Renaissance. They're honoring where they came from with kind of these little nods to the more well-known. But the one thing that does make this particular painting revolutionary is how Caravaggio handles light. A shaft of illumination cuts diagonally across the screen, falling on the face and hands of the figures. This isn't traditional decorative lighting. This is narrative lighting that is actually carrying symbolic and psychological weight. This is the light of Christ's call, quite literally, illuminating the tax collector, Matthew, while leaving parts of the scene still masked in these deep, dark shadows. Even when you look at the expressions Caravaggio has captured on this particular piece, Matthew pointing to himself in disbelief, the indifference of his companions who don't even notice the divine encounter right beside them. Through these gestures and the expressions, Caravaggio tells a lot more of a story than you would see in traditional religious iconography, because usually with those, you're looking at the pieces, you understand exactly what the relevance of symbolism is. This is directly telling you, this dude just got called up to the majors.
He kind of looks like he just got called up to the principal's office. The surprised look of me? First off, you know who I am. Second off, you wanted to talk to me. When you're looking at the painting to the right, the somewhat feminine-looking face with the hat with the feather in it looks amused, like, this is interesting. Like, oh, I didn't know you invited another friend over.
What was in that pizza, dude?
I can imagine it is extremely uncommon to have Jesus' face in shadows, which you can barely see his face in this. You can't make out many details. You can kind of like see the nose, you can see the beard along the side, the neck and his ear, but you can see a lot of the other faces much more clearly, including the just absolutely befuddled Matthew.
I do like the bearded dude who's just pointing to him going, that's him. Dude, not it.
So there's also one older guy who's kind of like standing, leaning over someone. He just makes me think of Ebenezer Scrooge.
Well, that is the dude who misses the forest from the trees. Well, the other 4 tax collectors are focused upon Jesus. That dude don't see nothing.
The 2 people on the leftmost side looking at it are more distracted by the money than there's a person who just came in.
Fair enough.
I really like the use of the color, like with the gold on the clothing of the person with the feather in their hat, as well as the red and blue on the sleeves of the younger man who is counting money. And the person sitting in the forefront looks like he's trying to look past where Jesus is coming. Like, is there anyone else coming? Like, who all did you invite to this meeting? The lighting effect is very well done and does draw your attention.
That is a very good read of this painting. It is worth noting that the colors you actually mentioned that were the most interesting are both usually more expensive pigments at that particular time, especially the royal blue and, of course, the cadmium red. Which, fun note, cadmium red is called that because there's cadmium in it.
That doesn't sound safe.
Yeah, again, if you ever cross the border with a painting and they request to take a sample, let them know beforehand that there's cadmium in that.
Good to know. Not sure when I'll ever experience that. But getting back to the painting, I have noticed another thing. The person with the feather in their hat looks like they're resting their arm on the arm of the person next to them. Like they've got their elbow propped up on the dude's shoulder.
Oh, yeah.
Kind of almost feels like maybe the feather hat is an apprentice.
Apprentice?
Or a Nepo baby.
Tax collector? Yeah, probably.
Because that kid feels more finely dressed than the others, who are nicely dressed, but the kid has a hat with a big fancy feather in it. And they're wearing lots of gold and red. Though it is interesting to note, it does appear Jesus is also wearing red, because you can see a little bit in his sleeve from where his hand is pointing. Although he isn't pointing very directly, he just has his hand reached in a direction. If you look closely, there is not like a specific point in his finger.
My theory is that, not based on the religious iconography, but some of the techniques, especially with the fancy hat, some of this may have been Caravaggio proving that he actually has this grasp over light and shadow. Because to be able to actually create that really dynamic contrast between the shadows and then just immediately feathered hat. Also, I believe Caravaggio would have used gold leaf for that vest.
A little bit of showing off his technique.
Yes, painting with gold leaf, it is a unique experience that I wish to never repeat or pay for again.
I am now intrigued by that story, but we will not get distracted.
This is definitely one of his most seminal works, often one of the most discussed pieces when it comes to Caravaggio, especially with the use of chiaroscuro.
With what?
The term is chiaroscuro. Chiaroscuro. For those listening at home, this is actually the artistic term used to explain strong contrasts between light and dark. Usually this is a full composition, so when you see Sin City, the comic, or even how they did the movie, that would be another more modern take on the use of chiaroscuro. This also is one of the hallmarks of... It's a way to also improve the composition of objects just due to the fact that you have this much greater range of shadows, which means you can then illustrate them more rounded and make the shape a lot more defined.
Yeah, add more depth, make it feel like you are not just looking at a picture of, say, an apple, but you're looking at an apple.
Exactly.
These faces feel more real than some of the other paintings that we have looked at. It feels a lot more like I just walked in on a meeting that I was not invited to, but everyone else is too distracted by the other person who wasn't invited to be confused about the fact that I'm here.
This is also one of the first times that artists have started to step away from the Mannerist style, which is this very surreal, very perfect design. Actually, you know what? Look up AI, anything generated by AI. That would be kind of an example of Mannerist, because it would be created to a formula. It would always be perfect, would be missing those personal imperfections. Well, Caravaggio went the other direction.
I would like to point out AI art is not perfect, because that's an easy way to tell if it's AI art, because just count the fingers. If it has too many teeth, doesn't look right.
Huh. Alright, there goes that theory.
So mannerism was a little bit more formulaic, having things be perfect, and moving away from that, that's where we have this scene where we have a lot of the painting that is just part of the wall and a window that appears to have been painted over or something. I feel bad for the guy in white whose back is to us, because it looks like he's just sitting on like a pillar or a box, which can't be all that comfortable considering the dude with the red and blue sleeves sitting on the left at least has a chair with a back to it.
If this was a common house, that would probably be a bench and he's kind of sitting on it like a hobby horse.
Could be.
Again, that does not look very comfy.
No, I would imagine not. I wonder if the person in white, he's sitting on the bench like that because he's supposed to be maybe some sort of security? Because he has a sword. And he's sitting in such a way that he could easily step up and back to get into a defensive position.
Ah,
should there be more people coming.
that actually is a really good read. It makes sense, yeah.
Also slightly amusing that he's wearing white tights. That's a questionable life choice.
I would break into the Men in Tights song, but I am way too fried to remember all the lyrics.
Listeners just start imagining the Men in Tights song and try and imagine Watson singing it. Have fun!
Free base my nightmare! But, yeah. So, this, of course, being one of Caravaggio's most well-known works, it does carry a lot of the hallmarks of his style, and this is actually one of the pieces most known for being associated with the creation of the Baroque style as well.
Interesting.
Which, much like kind of the Romanticism, is the much wider range of light and color, and the more dynamic but still realistic depictions of the form.
Going from woodblock prints to this is absolutely wild experience. Because I feel like I could reach out and feel the fabric, which I realize it's more common and easier to do with painting, but I also just really enjoy the dynamics of the facial expressions that we've got going on.
You get the feeling that these were done intentionally to kind of showcase the range of emotions Caravaggio could depict.
A little bit to show off, a little bit because it's fun.
Exactly. I get paid to do this. Suck it.
You're paying me? I'm gonna have fun with this. Also realizing with the size of the paintings, these figures would have been closer to life size. Maybe not exactly life size. Well, I guess it depends on how tall people usually got around that time period, which I feel like was probably shorter. But these still would have been relatively life-sized representations of the people.
Which, when you think about the technical level of being able to paint something that high and still make it look just that perfect, is truly an achievement.
Yeah, it gives you more space to add in those smaller details, but keeping all of the details within correct proportion so it has the effect that you're looking for, and not accidentally having a piece of fabric get a little too long in one spot, or maybe like the head's a little misshapen. At what point of the painting do you start? Do you like just start at one corner and work your way down, or do you start at the bottom and work your way up?
Usually in these types of paintings, he would still go with like kind of the color blocking, but traditionally, yes, you are correct. It would be going from top to the bottom. The interesting thing, though, is several artists have created these kind of wooden props that can be used to balance against a painting and still allow them to paint without getting into a weird position.
That's probably helpful, and you can focus more on the painting and less on the trying not to fall, either onto the floor or onto the painting.
Yeah, I believe we have an ukiyo piece entitled Cat's Paw on Piece.
Yep. One nice thing about painting on a wall is it's a lot harder to have a catwalk on it.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure cats were terrible back then, so they probably just saw it as a new challenge.
True. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of An Unexpected Art Lesson, the show where we talk about everything you didn't know about art. Stay tuned next week to hear Watson and I continue discussing the art and influence of Caravaggio. If you like what we're doing, you can follow us on social media and join the conversation over at An Unexpected Art Lesson on Threads, Blue Sky, and Substack. And you can also support us over on Patreon. Get early access to episodes and other fun things at patreon.com/anunexpectedartlesson.